Hi, I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation and welcome back to the Hive. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at adding room presence detection into our Home Assistant using ESPresence on some ESP32 boards like this one. This video is going to be a bit of a technical one. We're going to be flashing some firmware onto the ESP32s. We're going to be writing some YAML code into our Home Assistant configuration files. So while I roll the intro, why don't you take a moment to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified when I release new videos, which is normally each week. While you're at it, if you like what I do here and you want to support the channel, there's affiliate links in the video description to smart home gadgets that you can buy for your very own smart home and support the channel at the same time without paying any extra. Or you can support the channel directly through my Buy Me a Coffee link. Of course, those affiliate links and my Buy Me a Coffee link can all be found on my website, hivemindautomation.com.au. With all of that out of the way, let's get started. So I've been wanting to add some more detailed presence detection to my Home Assistant configuration for some time to improve the way automations work in my smart home based on whether certain people are in a particular room or not. Now there's human presence sensors available, but they only really tell us that someone is in a room, not who is in a room. Now sure, that particular detail might not be that important to most, but off the top of my head, I can think of a couple of different use cases where it could be useful. At the simplest end of the spectrum, it can be something just as simple as having slightly different color temperature preferences between family members. Someone might like cool white, someone else might like warm white. At the more extreme end of the spectrum though, maybe one of your family members is either hearing or vision impaired and needs either visual or auditory prompts instead of the other. The other thing that we can do here is be a bit smarter about the way we use some of those prompts. So rather than notifying every room in the house that someone's at the door, we could only prompt the rooms in the house where someone is being detected by the micro presence detection. Now, I've talked about presence detection in the past, the idea of detecting whether or not someone is at home or not. By extending that to room level presence detection, we can identify which room in the house someone's in, and that's sometimes referred to as micro presence, which I think I said that before as well. Now you might be wondering how we can possibly identify specifically who is where in the house, short of putting cameras in every room with face detection. But it's actually pretty simple when you consider how many electronic devices most people are carrying around with them on a daily basis. For example, I've pretty much always got my phone and my Apple Watch on, and there's even an AirTag that's on my keychain. And those kinds of things are normally Bluetooth devices, and they have unique Bluetooth identifiers alongside them. And it doesn't necessarily need to be an Apple Watch, any kind of smartwatch or any other Bluetooth device that you carry around with you could be useful for this. By setting up different base stations around the house to detect those Bluetooth devices and their signal strength, and then report that information back to Home Assistant, we can then start to make some guesses about where in the house the device is, and then in turn the person that is carrying that device. The obvious thing to mention here is that there's going to be times where someone might not be carrying their device, but those times should generally be the exception and not the rule. Now, in terms of prerequisites, in order to set up ESPresence, we need to get some ESP32s. And they do explicitly need to be ESP32s because we're looking for Bluetooth connectivity on these devices. I'm using these Node MCU style ESP32 development boards for this video, and I'll put a link in the video description if you want to get some for yourself. That will be an affiliate link. I like to use these because the built-in USB port lets me program them without a special connector, and the USB is also able to be used for powering the device. So in this case, we're going to need a micro USB cable, but there's also versions of this board with USB Type-C. Now be aware here that if you're using micro USB like me, not all micro USB cables are created equal. Some manufacturers who were only using the micro USB ports for powering their products ended up cheaping out when they were getting the cables created, and they would only connect the power and ground connections inside that cable rather than connecting the data lines as well. And I'll just demonstrate this. I have this cable here, which is explicitly a USB power cable only. And if we plug that in, this one's a little bit funny. I need to hold it in a specific position to work. But if we plug that in, we see we only get the ground and the V-bus lights are lighting up there. And that tells me that this is a power cable only. This will not provide data connections. We're going to need data connections for flashing these ESP32s, which is why we'll need a cable like this one here, where you see we've got ground, V-bus, and D plus and D minus there. So those two data pins are connected through. Now, in terms of the ESP32s that we can use, over here on the ESPresence homepage, and again, I'll put a link in the video description to ESPresence.com. If we click on this base stations link on the left here, we see that the firmware is compatible with the ESP32W Room and W Rover dual core ESP32s, and they're the most common ones. And there's a list here of supported boards. And it does mention here as well that they support the original ESP32, ESP32C3, and the ESP32S3. Bear in mind that S2 doesn't have Bluetooth, and do not buy an ESP8266. They don't have Bluetooth at all. So you can check out the ESPresence website to get a list of compatible devices. Now we're going to also need to connect the ESP32s to Wi-Fi as well. So we're going to need our Wi-Fi credentials, and most ESP32s, in fact, as far as I know, all ESP32s only connect to 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. For the most part, I'm not aware of any issues where they're unable to connect to a dual band Wi-Fi, but your mileage may vary there, so just be aware of that. So we'll need our Wi-Fi credentials, and the other thing that we need for ESPresence is an MQTT broker and the credentials for that MQTT broker. Again, I've gone through the process of setting up MQTT in previous videos, so that will not be a topic for today. So the first thing that we're going to need to do to get started is to flash our firmware to the ESP32 board. And it's pretty easy, so long as you've got a good USB cable, and in some cases you may also need relevant drivers for the serial programmer on your board installed onto your computer. This is actually a really super easy process. So in our web browser here, we are on our ESPresence.com page, and if we click on install firmware on the left hand side here, we have a browser-based installer available. So we've got our flavor is standard, and you can choose different flavors here. Now I am using the dev board, so I'm just going to go with the standard, but if you're using an M5 Atom, those kinds of things, you could change that. And we can also select the version, and there's even some beta versions available here as well. I'm just going to go with the 3.3.2 latest release version, and I'm going to plug my USB cable into my ESP32 here. Now this is plugged into my laptop. So we can see the red light there is flashing away, which tells me that it is powered up. There is some information here on enclosures on the page as well. I'm not going to worry too much about this right now, but there are links to Thingiverse for different cases that you can print, and some of them even have mounts for infrared sensors, which I'll talk a bit more about later. So with our ESP32 dev board plugged in, if I click connect on this page here, it's asking if it can use Bluetooth. I'm going to click allow. It said I didn't select a port, and this is the first time I've done it here, so I'll click connect again, and you see now we get ESPresence want to connect to a serial port. In this list that pops up, I'm going to select the CP2102 USB to UART bridge controller. This CU USB serial, actually I think I need this 1-3, not the 0001. I'll click connect on that, and it's connecting now to the board, and we can either install ESPresence or click the logs and console. And if I hit the logs and console, it's going to show me some information about what's happening on the device at the moment. I'll click back there though, and I'll click on install ESPresence. It's telling us, do you want to erase the device before installing ESPresence? All data on the device will be lost. I'll tick that box to say erase device, and I'll click on the next button here. And lastly, it's going to confirm one more time, do you want to install ESPresence v3.3.2? All data on the device will be erased, and I can click install. Now, I've found with these dev boards, before I click install, I need to press and hold the boot button, and then I can click install, and it says preparing installation. And once this says erasing, I can release that button, and it will then proceed to do the installation. It tells us that it's going to take 2 minutes and to keep the page visible to prevent slowdown. So if you follow the instructions, it should take only about 2 minutes. Okay, so it says it's wrapping up and then installation complete. So now we can click next, and it's asking us to configure Wi-Fi. Now I'm going to skip this step because I'm going to do this slightly differently. So I'll just skip. So now that we have ESPresence installed onto the ESP32, I'm going to click on my Wi-Fi up here. I'll expand other networks here. And we should see a Wi-Fi called ESPresence and then a string of letters and numbers. And if we connect to that ESPresence Wi-Fi network, we should in a second get this captive portal. Now this captive portal does automatically come up on a Mac. I can't comment on whether or not it's going to do the same thing on Windows or Linux. Your mileage may vary. So what I am going to do here though is I'm going to take note that we've got an IP address down the bottom here of 192.168.4.1. So I'm going to cancel this captive portal, and I'm going to click on the plus button here and type in 192.168.4.1. And we've got our configuration page here for our ESPresence. So I'll select our HiveMind IoT network here, and then I'll put the Wi-Fi password into this field here. Now, for whatever reason, this field is not treated like a regular password field, so it doesn't replace the characters with dots or asterisks or anything. With the Wi-Fi password entered here, we can also look and see that we've got English is our language, or we also have German or Netherlands as options there. We see that we have the ESPresence version 3.3.2 in there. And in the room field here, we're going to create a room name. Now, I'm going to put this one in the dining room because that's where I'm recording this video. The next thing we have here is seconds to wait for Wi-Fi before captive portal. Now, all this means is that it's going to try and connect to the Wi-Fi that you've defined up the top for 60 seconds. And if it fails after that 60 seconds, by default, it will then launch the captive portal and create the ESPresence Wi-Fi network. If you put -1 in here, it's going to wait forever until it can hit that Wi-Fi. I probably wouldn't recommend putting that as forever. The other thing to mention here is that we've got 300 seconds to wait in captive portal before it will reboot the system. So we've basically got 5 minutes to set this up in the captive portal mode before it's then going to just restart the device. There is an option here for Ethernet type. So if you have an ESP32 that has Ethernet, then you can select the specific Ethernet type in here. I will be looking at this as an option down the track, specifically some PoE options that I see in here. But for the time being, my ESP32s do not have Ethernet. Next, we have our MQTT settings. So I'll put the IP address or the DNS name of my MQTT server in here. I'm not going to change the port because I haven't changed the port for my MQTT service. And I need to put in a username and password for my MQTT service here. Now, it is worth noting that both the username and password field here are shown as password field. They blank out the password and you can reveal that depending on your browser settings there. Further down, we have send to discovery topic, and the default is to turn that on. I'm not going to change that default. We've got the Home Assistant discovery topic prefix. Again, I'm not going to change that default, which is Home Assistant. Send to telemetry topic. Again, not going to change the default. I'm not going to change the default for send to rooms topic because apparently that is now deprecated. So I'll leave that alone, and I'll leave the devices topic alone as well. The only default that I'm actually going to change in here is automatically update. I'm going to turn that on. You can also include pre-release versions in auto update, so that will install betas if you want to turn that on. I'm not going to do that. And you can enable Arduino over-the-air update. That just allows you to push code from the Arduino IDE or other IDEs directly to the device over Wi-Fi. And you can put a URL for a specific firmware in there, and it will then update from that URL on the next boot. We can click here and go to edit other settings, but I'm not going to do that right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save these changes, which hopefully will now save. I'm not getting feedback that it's saved the change, so I'm hoping that it's saved. I'm going to scroll back up to the top. Okay, there we go. I did finally get feedback that it had saved. Now I have noticed that it hashes out the Wi-Fi password after I hit save. So I'm not sure why it doesn't do it while we're entering it. I'm going to click restart device now, and we just get bye. That's going to restart the ESP32. I'll open up LAN-scan, which is my network scanning utility, and I'm going to start a scan of my Wi-Fi network here. We now have a new ESPresence device in here. Ignore these other two. These are for demonstration purposes later, but you see that we have ESPresence dining room, and that's the one that I just created there. And we can copy the IP address, and we can then paste that into our browser here, and we're back to the settings page, and we've got our MQTT, etc. Another way you could get the IP address is, provided your MQTT and everything is working, you could use an application like MQTT Browser, and when you log into the MQTT browser, you should see a topic for ESPresence, and then you would have a rooms topic inside there, and then we'd be looking for the dining room topic underneath there, and then we're looking for the telemetry section there, and you'll see that we've got the IP address. And so now that we've got this IP address in here, we see we've got the same settings page. Before I get into too much detail here, I'm going to head over to Home Assistant. I'm just going to refresh my page here, and we see that we have in our dining room, we have an ESPresence dining room there. And if I click on that, so I've got ESPresence dining room connectivity. And if I go to device info, it takes us to the ESPresence dining room device, and we can see some settings in here. So we've got our connectivity is connected, and configuration for absorption, the Arduino over the air, which we saw was an option that we could turn on or leave off. We also have auto update on or off there. There's an enroll button. I'm not entirely sure what that does, but we'll see it again a little later as we explore the ESPresence UI. Our maximum distance, we may need to modify this a bit later. And our pre-release switch again, which we saw in the web UI. A bit further down, there's some diagnostic information such as our free memory, a restart button, an update button, and an uptime sensor there, so we can see how long that particular device has been online for. So I'll back out here, and we've got our dining room. You would have seen in LAN-scan before, we also had one in the office and one in the master bedroom. Those I prepared earlier so that we can do some demos with how that's going to work, but we'll see that in action a bit later. I'll head back to the ESPresence dining room base page here. We'll scroll all the way to the bottom, and we see that we can click here to edit other settings. And so we now have this ESPresence page. We've got settings, devices, and fingerprints down the left-hand side. We'll take a quick look through here. I'll try not to go too deep into this stuff, especially not the stuff that is not super relevant for this kind of beginner's guide. But we've got scanning here. This is going to be relevant if we're having trouble discovering our MAC addresses for the devices. If you happen to know the MAC address of a device, you could type that in here with no colons, and if you've got multiple, you would just separate them with a space in the middle. But you can add that detail in there, and that will help you to discover your devices. We've got querying as well. I don't use that querying section. We've got counting. Again, I don't use counting. Filtering is kind of interesting because we have both includes and excludes. So you could potentially explicitly exclude specific Bluetooth IDs from being sent to MQTT to kind of quieten the noise in those logs a little bit. And you can change the maximum distance to report in meters here. And we saw that in the Home Assistant interface before. This is the kind of thing that we're possibly going to need to tune based on some of the data that we're getting in Home Assistant a bit later on. There's a report early if beacon has moved more than this distance in meters, and skip reporting if the message age is less than this in milliseconds, and those all have defaults. I'm not going to worry too much about that just yet. This calibration section I'm not going to worry about yet, but you can kind of see that the first thing in here is if you've got a 0 dBm transmitter at 1 meter, what's the expected RSSI? And so you can change that to try and improve the distance calculations, etc. So once we get past calibration, it starts getting interesting because we can see that there's options to connect LEDs to our ESP32. And in the drop-down menu here, there's things like we can do a PWM or we can do addressable LEDs here as well, whether they're RGBW or PWM LEDs, we can do all sorts of things in there, and which pin they're connected to, how many LEDs are connected to that pin, which is only applicable to the addressable LEDs, and then the LED control, so it'll show whether or not it's connected to MQTT, what the status is, whether it's detected motion or a count there, and you have 1, 2, 3 LED channels available to you, so you can connect up to 3 LEDs to 3 different pins. Then there's additional GPIO sensors that you can add. For example, you can add a PIR motion sensor to one of the GPIO pins on your ESP32. You can add a radar motion sensor to one of the GPIO pins. There's also switches that you can add, so that could be helpful, say, for example, for something like a read switch to detect the state of a door, whether it's open or closed, or even a window if it's open or closed. You also have some buttons there, so you could define different buttons, and there's either a DHT11 sensor pin or a DHT22 sensor pin, and different temperature offsets that you can set there to make sure that it's calibrated right. So you can even have your ESPresence base station be a temperature and humidity sensor as well. We also have I2C settings, which is really cool, and the possibility of using 2 different I2C buses as well, and different pin settings there. And I2C is especially great because it's essentially a 1-wire bus, and you should be able to have multiple I2C sensors connected to just one pin on your ESP32, and because they're addressed, you won't run into a problem where they're kind of conflicting and reading each other's data. So the I2C sensors that it supports are an AHT-X0 temperature and humidity sensor, a BH1750 ambient light sensor, a BME280 humidity temperature and pressure sensor, a BMP085 or BMP180 barometric pressure and temperature sensor, a BMP280 barometric pressure and temperature sensor, an SHTC1/3, an SHTW1/2, or an SHT3X/4X, or an SHT85 temperature and humidity sensor, a TSL2561 ambient light sensor, an SGP30 air quality sensor, HX711 weight sensor, or a DS18B20, and that is a temperature sensor, fairly well known temperature sensor there. So it's great to learn that our ESPresence base station can provide all sorts of helpful data that we can get out of this as well. If we click on our devices tab here, we have information about the different devices that are set up for our ESPresence here, and you'll note that it's discovered the others that I've set up here as well. I'm not entirely sure what this enroll button does. I have a feeling that just enrolls another base station into this setup. So it may be a better, quicker way to add multiple base stations to your setup here. This Fingerprints tab is where everything gets a little bit tricky. it's loaded the fingerprints. Now, to some degree, this data on this page is a bit sensitive because it is unique to the Bluetooth devices that I have here. I can't guarantee that these are even all my devices. There's a good chance that some of these devices could be the next door neighbors. So, you know, just for privacy reasons, I'm just going to block out a bunch of this stuff. Now, the hard part in here is going to be filtering out the useful information from the noise. If you happen to know the Bluetooth address of the device that you are looking for, you can make this a bit easier by using the find command in your browser and then typing that Bluetooth address in without the colon separating each two groups of characters there. However, in my case, and especially because I use Apple devices have a tendency to rotate their Bluetooth MAC address periodically for privacy reasons. So the next easiest way that I could come up with in order to determine what devices it is that I want to connect to my ESPresence was to hold my watch as close as I possibly can to the ESPresence, and then I'm going to grab this ID field here and copy that to my clipboard. Now, it's also possible that the device that you're trying to find is not showing up in this page. If that is the case, you are going to need to find out the Bluetooth MAC address of that device. Once you have that MAC address, if you go to settings and put that into this known BLE MAC addresses with no colons as separators between each two characters, and if you've got multiple, you would put multiple in here and separate each one by a space. You don't need a comma or anything like that. Once you put that data in there, you can save that information, and when you go to Fingerprints, it should show up on here. If it doesn't show up on here when you go to Fingerprints, you can go back to ESPresence.com, and if you go to the troubleshooting link down here and then to web terminal, if we click connect and then select the USB to serial connection there, and we have setup done. I think I connected to the wrong port, so I'll grab this one here, and there we go. So we see all of the details that are coming through here and all the different devices. So again, I'm going to have to blur a bunch of this out, but if you have added a known BLE MAC address in here, it will show up in this list with known against the device in the left hand side. So you would then be able to find that, and then you would grab and copy the ID from this column in the middle here. So grab that information, and once you've copied that data, we can then head over to our Home Assistant instance and start setting this up. Now, in my case, I don't need to fill out the known devices, but your mileage may vary. With the ID of the device now in my clipboard, I can head over to Home Assistant, and I'm going to need to edit my configuration file. I have the Studio Code Server add-on installed on my Home Assistant server here, and for whatever reason it has forgotten my settings. So over here in my Studio Code Server, so here in Studio Code Server, I'm on my configuration.yaml file, and I just wanted to point out one thing in here. I have this line here, which is sensor : bang include sensors.yaml. And what that allows me to do, instead of putting all of my sensors into this one file, it's going to read this sensors.yaml file and load anything in there under this sensor domain here. So if I go and look at my sensors.yaml file, we already have some information in here because I already use this. I use the time and date platform, and I want specific things from my time and date. I have a templates platform because I'm looking at things like the sun angle, and I also have the Bitcoin platform in here because I sometimes am interested in seeing the exchange rate and market price. I've just added this comment here of one entry for each beacon you want to track at the very bottom, and that's just so that we can kind of differentiate that this is where our ESPresence data starts. I might even add ESPresence. So I've just put that extra comment there to really differentiate that this is our ESPresence data here. You don't need to do this. This is just for the purposes of demonstrating in this video. Now, something else I've done here, I've also created a notes.yaml file, and this is purely to aid the process in me recording this video. I am going to drag that and drop that over on the right hand side, and that allows me to do a side-by-side window with Studio Code, and that's just going to let me be a bit more efficient about the way that we type out this information. I could copy and paste the information, but that's not really fair to you. I personally think that it's important to type this information out so that A, you make sure that you type it out correctly, and B, so that you get a good understanding of what each line of the code does. I'm going to blur out that notes.yaml file because it does contain sensitive information, and there'll be other parts here that do need to be blurred out as well. So now to actually put in some of the entries here, I'm going to put in a dash and then platform, if I can type. So dash platform MQTT underscore room. So that's the sensor platform that we're using. We're going to put in device underscore ID, and this is where we're going to then paste inside double quotation marks the Bluetooth ID of the device that we found in the fingerprints page. So I will paste that ID in here. We're going to give this device a name. So name colon, and I'll call this one ESP Stew Watch. And this needs to be in quotation marks as well, is what I'm going to call that. Our state underscore topic. So our state topic is the MQTT topic that we're trying to read. We're looking for ESPresence / devices and /, and then we can copy the ID from here and paste that at the end of that line. The next thing we need to put in here is a timeout, and I'll put that at 10 seconds. This is the default recommended in the documentation from the ESPresence page. And then there is an away underscore timeout. So if the device hasn't been detected for 2 minutes, 120 seconds, it is going to be marked as away. So we would do the same thing for any other devices that we want to track. So I'll put another platform colon MQTT underscore room and device underscore ID, and I will copy the device ID of the next device I want to track. And I've obviously prefetched this information to make things a bit smoother here. I'm going to type the name in here, and I'm going to call this ESP Stew Phone, and our state underscore topic. And I'm just going to copy this from over on my notes. And again, it's ESPresence / devices followed by the device ID. Our timeout is 10 seconds. Our away timeout is 120 seconds. Now, something I'll mention here is that when we're naming our devices, we need to understand that Home Assistant is going to create an entity with this name. So that's now got my watch and my phone. I'm just going to copy the last item here from my notes and paste that in. So again, platform MQTT room, the device ID, which we copied from the fingerprints page. The name is ESP Stew iPad in this case. Our state topic, again, ESPresence / devices, and then the device ID. Timeout 10 seconds and away timeout 120 seconds. I'm going to save this sensors.yaml file now, and we can close that out and close out our notes as well. So I've created 3 devices that I want to track in here. You would track as many devices as you like. For example, you'd put your own Fitbit in here. You might put your partner's Apple Watch, or your kids might have an iPhone or a watch or something like that. And you'd put these details in here. Obviously, You could have 3, you could have 25. The sky's the limit here as far as I'm aware. So with those entries in, our YAML is saved. What I'm going to do is head over to Developer Tools. I'm going to check my configuration to make sure we get green text in here saying that nothing's going to stop us from starting up Home Assistant. This is taking an awful lot longer than it normally does. So provided we get configuration will not prevent Home Assistant from starting, we can click Restart and then restart Home Assistant. And then one more time, we'll click Restart. And then in a couple of moments when we come back, we should see we've got some more information on the system here. Okay, so after restarting Home Assistant here, we see that we've got a dining room, master bedroom, and office ESPresence base stations are listed here at the top. I'm going to scroll down, and in this sensors section here, we see we have ESP iPad is in Stu office. ESP phone is in dining room. It's just gone to master bedroom now. I don't know how, but dining room and Stu watch is also in dining room. I'm gonna see if I can figure out why this is flapping between the master bedroom, the office, and the dining room. Strange. I have a feeling that the distances are maybe overlapping a little bit here, which could be causing some of that. So that's gonna probably involve tuning the sensitivity of each of those base stations. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go move some stuff around. I'll keep my watch on my wrist. I'll put my phone in the master bedroom. I'll put my iPad in the master bedroom, and I'll put my phone in the office, and we'll see what happens. So I'll put my phone in the office, my iPad in the master bedroom. And so you can see there, as I moved around the house, things changed. So the phone is now flapping between the master bedroom and the office. Again, that's just going to be to do with the sensitivity. My watch is in the dining room because I just got back and sat down. And the iPad is showing in the master bedroom. So that is all looking fine. So what I'm going to need to do to prevent this flapping issue from happening is the dining room sensor. I'll go to device info and I'll just drop that max distance down to 4 meters. And I'll back out here, and we'll do the same thing for the master bedroom. I will go into device info and I will drop that max distance down to 4 meters. And then if we go back to our overview and find our sensor details here, that seems to have at the very least slowed the flapping down, and it looks pretty stable now. So the phone is showing as in my office, and my watch is in the dining room because it's attached to my wrist and I'm sitting in the dining room, and my iPad is in the master bedroom. So it seems to have just been a case of really altering that sensitivity to ensure that we weren't getting those kind of overlaps. Something I'll mention here as well, when we look at the attributes of the device and we see this distance here, you do need to understand that 2 devices in the exact same position could display very different distances here. And that comes down to the signal strength that is being transmitted by the Bluetooth device. So it is important that you tune your setup specifically for your devices to ensure that you're getting that data correctly. I'll probably need to also make sure that the sensor for the office is appropriately set up. So there we see it just flapped over to dining room there for a second as well. This kind of issue can also be affected by where in the room the base station is. You don't want 2 base stations on opposite sides of the same wall, because you'll start to see this kind of behavior where it's flapping between them. So now that we've got these devices and these states are the room that the device is in, we could then use that state as a condition in some of our automations. For example, if you have a lights off automation, you could have it as a condition that if my watch is in that room, it's not going to run the actions there. Something else I'll mention here with the individual base stations as well. If I go into device info, I imagine that for our sensors or our configuration, etc., if we'd added things like a temperature and humidity sensor, I imagine that we would see those up here. We'd possibly have options to turn our LEDs on and off, etc., in this section here. So Just because this is what it looks like in this bare bones configuration doesn't mean that we wouldn't then have additional data in here if we had added those sensors. And I will 100% be doing some experimentation with those additional sensors in a future video. So that's a pretty basic overview of our ESPresence room presence detection. And it's certainly not a project for beginners. And there's obviously going to need to be some tuning of the settings, like that max distance specifically. As I use this setup over the next few weeks, I'll be able to kind of track the distances that are reported and the locations that devices are reported in. But again, I think we'll really be looking to track the watch, because the watch is the thing that's most likely to be with us wherever we go in the house. I do quite often put my phone down and leave it somewhere and then walk around the house. So using the watch as our entity is probably going to be the most logical there. I do think that adding this micro presence is going to be especially helpful to bring the next level of advancement to my automations within Home Assistant. A handful of inexpensive ESP32s, and we were able to add this micro presence into our Home Assistant setup and start tracking devices that people typically have on them, like their phone, but especially wearables are going to be important for that. And that should allow us to improve the user experience of various automations within our home. As I mentioned before, we can ensure that things like automatically turning off lights doesn't happen if tracked devices in that room, or we could maybe not send a notification about the garage door being open if someone's phone is inside the garage. Another thing I thought of is that you could put one of these devices at your front door and then add IDs for your friends and family's devices and have a digital assistant say something along the lines of, your mum is at the front door when she arrives to come visit. I really like the fact that we're able to get more bang for our buck with ESPresence by adding PIR sensors, temperature and humidity sensors, LEDs, buttons and switches to our ESP32, and I'm definitely going to perform a handful of experiments doing just that in hopefully the not too distant future. I do have a handful of temp and humidity sensors that I can try and use, and I'll get hold of some other sensors as soon as I can. Let me know your thoughts on room level presence detection in Home Assistant in the comments section down below, and especially using ESPresence. That's all we have for this video, and I do hope that it's helped you in your home automation journey. Be sure to drop a comment below with a home automation idea you'd like to see me cover in a future video, and don't forget to follow HiveMind Automation on Instagram and Facebook. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button down below to give it a like, and if you're not already subscribed, now's a great time to change that. If you hit the bell icon while you're subscribing, you'll also then get notified when I release new videos, which is normally each week. Lastly, if you like what I'm doing here and you want to support the channel, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Any contribution you make through Buy Me a Coffee does get put towards making more and hopefully better content for you to enjoy. Don't forget to check out my website, hivemindautomation.com.au. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.